Hello, I am Dr. Bandy Lee, forensic and social psychiatrist, violence expert, and president of the World Mental Health Coalition. Today, we will be reviewing what happened at our major National Press Club conference, the more dangerous state of the world and the need for fit leadership. In summary, thanks to your support, it was a major success. We had a full house in ways that were not seen in recent days at the grand ballroom of the National Press Club, according to some observers. And I put up a scene so that you can gain a sense of what it was like to be there. But the energy was palpable, and the gathering of national security experts together with renowned mental health experts in unprecedented ways to have a critical conversation on the most crucial and central issue of our day was exhilarating. As you know, we had tried to warn the public about the dangers of a Trump presidency starting in 2017 with our instant New York Times bestseller, The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, 27 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. It was so popular, it was later expanded 2 years later to The Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, 37 psychiatrists and mental health experts assess a president. And this year, in 2024, we are releasing, alongside the conference, a new book, The More Dangerous Case of Donald Trump. 40 psychiatrists and mental health experts warn anew. It's an exciting volume of many more renowned psychiatrists and other mental health experts contributing new essays, updating our analysis, as well as some old experts. So I hope you'll pick up a copy. It is a critical volume that also contains our dangerousness risk assessment of Donald Trump. A panel of the most eminent living psychiatrists had gotten together to do a pre-sentencing report, originally intended to be submitted to Justice Juan Merchan in the Manhattan District Criminal Court. We will be sending him this whole volume as well as all the judges and courts, because mental health experts often do dangerousness assessments as for sentencing recommendations. And we feel that in this case, there's a particular need. But that's just one of numerous essays that are extremely informative, coming from the best minds of psychiatry, psychology, and mental health expertise. So the whole reason for our organizing this unprecedented conference was because of the critical need for public education. In the midst of what may be called a mental health pandemic, the public has been deprived of the most relevant expertise, which is mental health expertise. And so in order to make up for some of that dearth, as well as to address the critical situation we face, in that we have a candidate for the US presidency who has been responsible for the vast majority of 1.2 million American deaths from COVID-19 pandemic mismanagement, who has incited an unprecedented violent insurrection against the government, and is now running for re-election in the top position at that government that he attacked. And he has also been responsible in ways that are psychologically more explainable in a worsening and escalating global conflicts through his own highly violence-prone psychology, his upending of the existing world order, his emboldening of violent dictators around the world, and reversing many gains that had been made in a collaborative, cooperative model based on alliances of countries to tackle world problems into one of competition, conflict, and animosity. And so we are at a critical time where the survival of humanity may be at stake. So I emphasized from the beginning that this is not a political conference, but a medical one. And so to try to give the public the correct expertise, the level of rigor and accuracy that the public deserves to have to be able to make its decisions in this critical election year, we have tried to bring together great minds in the fields relevant to national security, as well as in mental health. And so to go over some of what was discussed, I can go over some of the panelists. There were 19 of us, a gathering of an unprecedented number in the same space to speak about the most central issue of our day. So our first panel started with Attorney Ralph Nader, a lawyer, political activist, and former presidential candidate who emphasized how we would never hire Donald Trump to be the head of an organization, to lead a union, to head a university, and yet he is being considered to head a nation. How dangerous that situation is, and how we must consider fitness as central in our decision. Then Attorney Richard Painter spoke, former Chief White House Ethics Counsel of the George W. Bush administration. He spoke about the need to hear from mental health experts, that legal methods have largely failed, that as a lawyer, he could not offer anything to the public, but mental health experts have something important to say. Professor Claire Finkelstein then spoke. She is director of the Center for Ethics and the Rule of Law at the University of Pennsylvania Law School. She spoke about how war-making powers and many crucial military decisions have been relegated to the presidency in ways that now fitness has become far more important than ever because of the increasing power that is vested in the presidency. Then Honorary Claudine Schneider spoke, a former 5-term Republican Congresswoman who sat face to face with President Ronald Reagan and spoke about how important it was to have a president who listens, not only forces you to adopt his ideas, but can consider any errors on his part, greater knowledge on the part of others in making his decisions. Then Professor Peter Kusnik spoke about, he is the director of Nuclear Studies Institute at American University, who spoke about the madness of nuclear decision-making being placed in the sole office of the US president, and the madness that we have in human civilization's destruction in an instant, the way that we have set up nuclear competition among nations. Then Dr. Joseph Romm spoke, former acting assistant secretary at the US Department of Energy, and he spoke about how we were at a razor's edge of having calamitous climate changes that may not avoid our collective destruction of our collective habitat, and therefore the responsibility for us to choose based on this one issue alone was extremely important. Then we heard from Admiral Michael Smith, Rear Admiral and founder of the National Security Leaders for America. he emphasized the importance of fitness in the commander-in-chief, because most military decisions eventually come down to one office. And Donald Trump shows none of the qualities that are considered to be important in that position, in that important military position. Then we heard from General Dr. Stephen Xenakis, who is a retired brigadier general and medical corps officer for the US Army, who emphasized the importance of evaluations of fitness for duty and dangerousness, which he evaluates constantly. And his commanders relied on him to be able to tell them whether anyone is unfit for their duties or in fact could carry on their duties. And he emphasized the need to say something when we see something, which in fact is an overriding responsibility of mental health professionals, no matter in what setting they are and what context. So that was the first panel. Dr. Xenakis being the only psychiatrist there, combined with his military position. And also we heard from Ray McGovern, who is a former CIA officer and chair of National Intelligence Estimates, who served 7 administrations, and told us that how important sanity is in the presidency. And in the nuclear age, mutual understanding that mutual security is the only way to security is a sign of sanity. The conclusion of the first panel during the roundtable was that legal approaches had failed, political methods have failed, and military standards have failed to hold a dangerous person in check. And so we're now at a place where it is incumbent on the public as our last recourse for saving us from apocalyptic danger. And so we heard from all the national security experts as to the message to the public, and the urgency was the need to vote, and to vote on the basis of existential issues, not on any specific policies. We do not have the luxury to do that at this time. The second panel was that of mental health experts. We started with Dr. Robert J. Lipton, renowned author of Nazi Doctors and Distinguished Life Fellow of the American Psychiatric Association, who spoke about the importance of factual reality. There can be many realities that are connected to our political views, our opinions, our subjective desires, but to base things on factual reality is very compelling, and in fact is a way that we assess individuals who are mentally compromised and detaching from reality. So our need to stay with factual reality is critical in avoiding a malignant reality. Dr. Judith Herman then spoke, renowned author of Trauma and Recovery, as well as Distinguished Life Fellow of the American Psychiatric Association. She spoke about how power expands the pre-existing symptoms. So, for example, grandiosity can become delusions of grandeur. Paranoia can become paranoid delusions, and impulsivity and poor judgment can become catastrophic, destructive decision-making, as we have seen, unfortunately, as we predicted in Donald Trump. Then Dr. James Gilligan spoke. These would be 3 of the original mental health experts who spoke at the original conference that I organized at Yale School of Medicine in 2017, when we decided we had an ethical obligation to speak to the public about the dangers that we saw. So Dr. James Gilligan is former director of the Harvard Institute of Law and Psychiatry and former chair of President Clinton's national campaign against youth violence. He spoke of the fact that mass murderers, the biggest mass murderers of history, such as Adolf Hitler, Joseph Stalin, Mao Zedong, these individuals were dangerous, not because of the people they harmed directly. It's not that they killed off a lot of individuals themselves. Some of them didn't kill anybody, but their ability to mobilize millions of people to listen to them so that they will in turn kill millions of people. And that is the context in which he warned against Donald Trump, his ability to mobilize and incite violence in millions of people. Then Dr. James Marikangas spoke, forensic psychiatrist and clinical professor at the George Washington University School of Medicine, as well as consultant for the National Institute of Mental Health, who described his experience of, as a military officer before he became a psychiatrist, how he observed the explosion of a nuclear bomb. It was the last time an above ground testing was done in the Pacific, and the spectacular destruction that he saw possible from this explosion made him determine that this bomb should never be used. And he has been a consistent voice warning against the dangers of Donald Trump. In fact, he was part of the recent panel that formed to do our dangerousness risk assessment on Donald Trump as recommendations for sentencing to prevent dangers from himself and to serve as a deterrent for him as well as for society. So again, I encourage everyone to pick up our new book and to read about it. Next, speaking on the panel was Dr. Stephen Soltz, past president of Psychologists for Social Responsibility and leading activist against torture. He is, in fact, the leading reason why psychologists were pulled out of the torture program through the George W. Bush administration. And he spoke about the ability of demagogues to mobilize the shadow in us and to diminish the part in us that would mitigate against the violent impulses that we all have. Next speaking was Dr. Henry Friedman, psychoanalyst and associate professor of psychiatry at both Tufts and Harvard medical schools. He focused on the paranoid tendencies that the population has, which demagogues can mobilize in very frightening ways. He stated that it may be uncomfortable to compare or consider as identical Donald Trump's psychology with that of Adolf Hitler's. But he asserted that he believes that they are indeed identical. Next speaking was Matthew Bywater, the only non-mental health expert on the panel, but he's a student and scholar of authoritarian societies who has studied China and North Korea, and a human rights activist who represented for us the next generation on this panel. And he spoke, he's been advancing the World Mental Health Coalition's Declaration of Freedom of Mind, which was composed in 2020. And he has been trying to enter that into the United Nations asserting that that populations should not be subject to mental slavery, in fact, which can happen through propaganda, spread of symptoms, such as we have seen with Donald Trump, which usurps people's agency and independence to be able to make their own choices. And therefore, after following him was Dr. Stephen Hassan, author of The Cult of Trump and a renowned undue influence expert, who spoke about Trump followers as being very much like cult members with whom one should not confront, but rather treat with respect, give them an off-ramp by offering your friendship, your human connection, and that was a way of diminishing some of the cult defenses that arise whenever you directly confront either their leader, the doctrine, or their followership. And then finally, we heard from Dr. Drew Weston, professor of psychology and psychiatry at Emory University, and author of The Political Brain, who spoke about how our country was not prepared for someone like Donald Trump. But there are ways of mental health experts of detecting a demagogue personality through what he developed as a 200-item scale for seasoned clinicians to assess from afar, not needing a personal examination, to assess whether or not an individual has dangerous personality characteristics. Now, he developed this in 2008, far before Donald Trump came on the scene. And so we know it wasn't developed as a result of him, but he fit every criterion, according to Dr. Weston. So that scale can be found also in The More Dangerous Case of Donald Trump, in our new publication, which collects some of the best minds in psychiatry, psychology, and mental health expertise to be able to give the public the tools of interpreting what is happening in our society today, what is happening in terms of Donald Trump, his disabling of institutions, be they impeachment, prosecution, or the courts, criminal accountability. All these things have been impaired or disabled because of the psychological effects of someone who is mentally unfit. And so the entire premise is that mental capacity is a prerequisite for all other institutions to function. And we have a situation where that is lacking. We then went on to audience questions, and in fact, a major question from the audience was our blackout in the media. That media were functioning more as a conduit of Donald Trump's symptoms, facilitating their transmission rather than mitigating them. And it wasn't just lying that they ought to be countering, but the kinds of psychological manipulation, deception, and abuse that Donald Trump has been able to effectuate and essentially threaten and intimidate anyone who would hold him accountable. And that is why mental health experts thought it's so urgent to come out and speak up very early on so that we could prevent the progression of this public mental health crisis, in that the more severe the collective mental symptoms, the less we will be able to recognize it, and the less we will be able to guard ourselves against it. And that is why we are in a perilous situation right now, that in some context I've called a death spiral, because the goal of mental pathology is destruction and death. And we're heading very quickly to a place of no return. There's a collective statement that we came up with that pretty much all the panelists signed to, except for one who has a conflict because of his past actions. But the National Press Club conference statement consists of the following. This election comes at a most important turning point in the nation's history. For these reasons, top national security experts and leading mental health experts came together as never before on September 27, 2024, at the National Press Club in Washington, D.C., to participate in an unprecedented conference. The theme was the more dangerous state of the world and the need for fit leadership, organized by the World Mental Health Coalition. The experts feel it is most important to inform the country of the conclusions they collectively expressed. First, that mental fitness is a medical issue, not a political one. Second, the immense powers of the presidency require that anyone elected to that office is mentally fit. Number three, in the nuclear age, a president must understand that there is no security without mutual security. Number four, fitness for duty and dangerousness are different evaluations than diagnosis of mental illness, and they are assessments that mental health experts are obligated to do as part of their societal professional responsibility. And finally, Donald Trump has demonstrated signs that could make him unsuitable and dangerous for the White House. In fact, multiple of our evaluations would suggest so. The experts tackled how our country is governed, by whom our country is led, and whether the institutions of our democracy are sufficiently resilient and self-correcting to meet the dangers and challenges of our time. We urge all Americans to watch the 1.5 hour video summary of the conference at dangerouscase.org. I hope you are doing so too. We urge all Americans to ponder as each of us had to do, why we all decided to come together for this singularly important gathering at the National Press Club at this critical time, and decided to jointly endorse this urgent statement. So 19 professionals in total have all agreed that this election is an extreme national security risk that affects not just the survival of our democracy, but the survival of our species, and that the mental fitness of the candidate is utterly important. We focused on Donald Trump because he's the only unfit person running for office whose dangerousness has been demonstrated over and over, but not recognized and not discussed because mental health experts have been excluded from public discussions. The exclusion and censorship of the most critical information for the public seems quite deliberate. And so we discussed how that's hampered the public's ability to gain knowledge, power, and the ability to protect itself, as well as to make informed decisions. So finally, we had roundtable discussions among the panelists. We've opened to audience questions, and the audience members were able to interact with panelists during reception. There was a very nice reception with hors d'oeuvres, as the National Press Club does very well. And then finally, we had a private dinner among panelists to strategize and plan, consider all the things we could possibly do. And so we have many things in the works. This is not the end, but the beginning, because a lot of the material that came out can be distributed, used Highlights can be extracted from the panel discussions, and those of you, all of you who are subscribed to my Substack newsletter have received clips, the summary video, and we have now put out a collective statement. We will now be going out to news organizations, to local newspapers. We might tackle battleground states to try to get this message out as widely as possible, because the slightest difference could make all the difference in a race so close. So that is the summary, or at least my experience. So I welcome your questions, your comments, feedback, ideas. If you go to the React button, you can raise your hand and then unmute yourself before you speak.